Life on board a Tudor ship in 13 minutes. Life on land in Tudor times was very hard. It was a time when people hardly ventured outside their own village. Going to sea was a great adventure, where the pay was relatively good, and signing on with a privateer like Drake made it possible for a sailor to win glory and fame as an explorer, and perhaps capture fabulous wealth. However, most sea voyages consisted of long periods at sea on ships that were usually small caravels and carracks, sometimes even for years. They also endured uncomfortable living conditions, bad food, bad weather, disease and infection, hard punishments, and often death. The work included pumping water out of the ship, even the best wooden ships took on some water, changing and repairing the sails, mending holes in the ship, and keeping watch for storms, enemies and land. Further, the crew were divided into groups called watches. The watches worked in shifts for about 4 hours at a time. Other jobs included the captain, pilot, soldiers and gunners, surgeons, carpenter, cook, and ordinary sailor. 16th century ships were hotbeds for disease and infection, brought about by the lack of proper sanitation, cramped sleeping conditions and straw-filled mattresses on the hard decks, and were constantly wet and damp. In Tudor times, half the crew of a ship were dead by the end of a long voyage. Poor food and diet, related diseases, all being a major cause. Larger ships would have a barber surgeon on board. He would be able to dress wounds and set bones, but against disease the effectiveness of his medicine was virtually non-existent. The most dreaded disease was scurvy, lack of vitamin C, which was responsible for tens of thousands of deaths alone. Although some captains in the 16th century were advocating diet was the cause, it was to be another several hundred years later that this theory was finally medically proven. The scurvy sufferer first became listless, then his skin broke into angry boils. His gums began to swell and bleed, and his teeth would fall out. Within days, arms and legs became swollen, ugly black bruises appeared, and breathing became almost impossible. This was followed by coma and death. While underway, a sailor's work held some real hazards, especially climbing the shroud lines up to the yards and standing on foot ropes working 30 to 50 feet above the deck. A fall from the yard was almost always fatal, whether the sailor fell into the sea or onto the deck. If he fell into the sea, he usually drowned before the ship could rescue him. Normally there was little if any effort made to rescue, especially if the water was very cold, as he would only live minutes. Often hazardous work needed to be done at night in the midst of a howling storm, when the sea sails needed to be reefed out or furled to compensate for the strong wind. This meant that sailors had to know the rigging well enough to work in total darkness, with fingers numb from the cold. Work on the deck during a storm was almost as dangerous due to the chance of being washed overboard as the sea spilled into the deck. Because many voyages lasted a long time and there were no fridge freezers, sailors had to find ways to stop their food going off. The most common way was to salt the food. This meant storing meat and fish in barrels or sacks with salt. Some vegetables and even eggs were also pickled, i.e. stored in vinegar. Small animals were carried where practical and could include goat, pigs, chicken and lamb. As well as providing meat, animals also supplied eggs and milk for the ship's crew. On Tudor ships, food was cooked over an open fire in the ship's cook box. The cook box had 3 sides and a bar across the top to hang pots called cauldrons. The fire was on a tray at the bottom of the cook box, which was on legs to lift off the deck of the ship. It was obviously vital to keep the hot coals away from the timber structure of the ship to prevent fire, and so the firebox was always placed downwind if it was lit when the ship was at sea. The sailors usually had one hot meal a day, but food supplies often ran out. Some fresh food was taken on a voyage, but when it was used up, a sailor's diet mainly consisted of salted fish and meat and ship's biscuits, a hard-baked biscuit which could be kept for a long time. Rats, maggots and weevils often got to the food before the sailors did. A sailor brought his sea chest on board with clothing and a few personal items. His clothing usually consisted of a woolen pullover shirt with hood, woolen knee-length trousers with long woolen stockings, and a knitted cap. Although they had shoes, they often went barefoot to avoid slipping on decks and ropes. No clothing provision was made for bad weather unless the sailor brought it himself. Due to the lack of fresh water, sailors did not wash themselves or their clothes very often, and only had a few clothes worn day and night throughout the voyage. A few sailors might include a fiddle, fife or tin whistle in their sea chest and provide some music for song and dance in idle times. Strict discipline was essential on board ship, and punishment was swift and severe. Punishment on ship was governed by the rules of Oleron, believed to have been instituted by Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, wife of Henry II. They covered everything from blasphemy to gambling, and the issue of sailors' victuals. A sailor caught stealing was tarred and feathered, then forced to run the gauntlet of the whole crew, finally being dismissed from the ship. A murderer was lashed to his victim's body and thrown overboard. Drawing a knife on a shipmate could result in the loss of the right hand. The worst punishment, though rare, was keel-hauling, when a sailor was tied to a rope, thrown over the side of the ship, dragged through the water underneath the rough, barnacle-covered ship's bottom, and hauled up the other side of the ship. Few survived this gruesome torture. On board the Golden Hind, for example, a Thomas Doughty was accused and found guilty of mutiny. As this was one of the worst crimes on board, he was sentenced to death by beheading. Sailors were a very superstitious lot, and sometimes mixed this with religious belief. A ship should not begin a voyage on Friday because it was the day Christ was crucified. When building a ship, a silver coin must be placed under the base of the main mast. One must never destroy a printed page, as it might belong to the Bible. Many sailors were illiterate and could not be sure if a page might be from the Bible, so they took the safe position that all printed pages were scripture. Some shipbuilders carried a burning firebrand through every part of a new vessel to drive out evil spirits. Other unlucky days to set sail were on Candlemas Day, believing that any voyage begun then would end in disaster. This may be related to the superstition to remove all Christmas decorations by Candlemas, a practice done well into the Victorian times. Sailors also believed that if the sunrise was red, to take warning, the day ahead would be dangerous. Red sky at night, sailors' delight. Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. This saying actually has some scientific validity. If the morning skies are red, it is because clear skies over the horizon to the east permit the sun to light the undersides of moisture-bearing clouds. A Jonah is a long-established expression amongst sailors, meaning a person, either a sailor or a passenger, who is bad luck, which is based on the biblical prophet Jonah. Sailors also worried about huge sea monsters that could pull a ship down to the depths. and also the mythical siren that would lure sailors to their death. Though it was considered bad luck to have women on board due to the potential for distractions, which in turn would anger the sea gods and cause bad weather, there were of course exceptions, such as pirate Grace O'Malley, the Sea Queen of Connaught from 1530 to 1603, Lady Mary Killigrew 1530 to 1570, and Lady Elizabeth Killigrew 1570 to 1582, and probably many more posed as men on board ship in order to escape their lives. Although evidence is slim, there may well have been black sailors, as in every other area of Tudor life. Indeed, DNA and chemical analysis of skeletons from Henry VIII's warship suggests two of the ship's occupants' heritage were traced back to modern-day Morocco and Algeria. Finally, as a seagoing nation, many of our sayings come from ship's traditions. Sailing close to the wind, shaking a leg, learning the ropes, taking down a peg or two, raising a red flag, all at sea, son of a gun, 3 sheets to the wind, pipe down, abandon ship, on board, a wide berth, batten down the hatches, between the devil and the deep blue sea, in the doldrums, in deep water, don't rock the boat, all hands on deck, and dead in the water. Life on board a Tudor ship in 13 minutes. Please subscribe, like or click on the bell to be notified of other upcoming videos. Thank you for watching. See you soon.